primary section. And three characteristics I always labelled with teachers I considered as good teachers that aided me, helped me learn, that I endeavoured to kind of become as I entered into the teaching profession. I was motivated by teachers I liked, that were honest, open and encouraging, as opposed to those who seemed stern and cold and just not very approachable. I also found it much easier to learn through doing, as John Dewey said, and the teacher who took a genuine interest, not a teacher that walked into a class and spoke for the 40 minutes and went straight out the door, as the teacher that actually catered to the students' needs, really thought to benefit the understanding of the student, his or her students, as said by Carol Dweck in 07. The development of my values over the 4 years in St. Patrick's College, in first year, were very much rooted in fun, enjoyment, kind of irrational, but still filled with potential. I wanted to be the teacher that was kind of approachable, nice, and the students would have a good time. By second year, my values became more set in stone. They were student-centred, focused on a strong pedagogical relationship, focused on motivation, and so that students could learn. So that was the what I figured out after 2 years of engaging with it. By my 4th year, I realised why these were my values. So I valued lifelong learning, social mobility, and the freedom associated with education. And I viewed it kind of like a meandering river, which was the picture I did there. Another thing, the rationale, a spider metaphor, I kind of came up with myself with a bit of help from Myers and Reynolds and O'Fallon. Basically, that all parts of education are related to each other. There's no part that's completely cut off from everything else. So motivation is related to inclusion, differentiation, constructivism. All of it is somehow related to everything else. And I chose motivation as a point which I could focus on because it was so subjective that anyone could, it relates to everything else. So by looking at motivation, I was improving my pedagogical relationships, my inclusion, all other aspects of education which I valued. The process of my self-study, I picked 2 groups, and I didn't pick them immediately when I started. I kind of looked at the groups I had, and I decided to pick the 2 most diverse, kind of to give it a bit of validity. So I had a first year Gaelic group and a 5th year religion group, and the students couldn't have been any more different as groups. My first year groups were very energetic, but as they weren't from a Gaelic area, their Irish was kind of limited. And my 5th year religion group were very passive, lackluster was the word I used to describe them. Very hard to get anything out of them, and that resulted in a minor problem later. And because of the literature review and the reading I did as part of the self-study, I decided that a good starting point was activities. So I created activities that I thought would encourage the students to get involved, and so to create motivation, the conditions of motivation in the classroom. So my first year groups, I created as many games and activities just to really get them involved, using the language. And over time I discovered some work better than others. So for example, one day I played Hangman with my first year group, which doesn't really aid them. It doesn't cause their Irish to develop, it's just random guesswork. But things like giving them surveys, for example, Cahavaintra pastimes, writing out a list of questions and getting them to go around having questions and interviewing people, so they're actually using the language with the template. While with my 5th year group, activities such as group work, making posters, kind of getting them more in line with what would be expected when they go to 3rd level, public speaking, presentations, all that kind of stuff. However, over time with the 5th year group, I found that I hadn't developed a pedagogical relationship with them because I was resorting a lot to group work because they were very slow to answer. And after 2-3 weeks, I was standing in front of them and I was looking around and I said, I have around 4 names I actually know in this room. I should know a lot more. And that's when I was talking to a critical friend of mine, and he gave me a heap of examples and ways of learning. Leave the journal on the table so you can see, don't use as much group work, lots of different things. Get them to present and learn from them discover what they like. I also give them, I had the freedom of not having to follow the course as much. The teacher, my cooperating teacher, said I had a bit of freedom with the topics I covered, so I let them pick, and they were more engaged then. And over the 12-week process, I developed a strong pedagogical relationship by the end. With my first year group, I had the benefit of focusing, getting to discuss with some of my cooperating teachers and tutors that came to inspect me, and they all kind of said the same thing. The class, there was knowledge going on, there was information being passed on, but the students didn't seem to get. I would walk in at the start and say, okay, we're doing An Tom or whatever today, or Cahavimshra, but by the end the process wasn't as clear. So I endeavoured to give it more direction and purpose. So direction, saying at the start of class, writing on one side of the board, we are going to look at a particular topic today, and by the end make sure a small bit of revision at the end to see that they've seen, oh yes, we actually have done that, we haven't just done a comprehension or something simple like that. Moving on. To give it a bit of validity, Brookfield, we've mentioned a lot today. I tried to use as many of the lenses as I possibly could. The autobiographical, so looking at myself, how could I affect it? I was focusing on my values of motivation, being student-centred, etc. My students, looking at my students, seeing how they react, noting how they react. Another small example I did to gauge their understanding was tick it out, was a method I used where I gave them a small slip of paper and said, write down 1 or 2 small things you learned from the lesson, and also something you didn't understand. And from that I was able to gauge if I covered a topic, for example with my 5th year RE class, I discovered I did a lesson on the Seder meal for religion, the Jewish Passover, and some had thought of it as an out-of-date practice. So I was able to correct their misunderstanding the following day. Also looking at colleagues, the Droichead scheme also offers great opportunities there, tutors, critical friends, and I try to engage with as much of it as possible. And literature as the final point of information, the final lens, something sometimes people overlook, and as was already stated, reading widely and things you don't necessarily agree with. Moving on. So my findings, I had 5 key findings. The relationship between a strong pedagogical relationship and motivation kind of speaks for itself. Students are going to be more motivated by a teacher they feel is approachable, which goes back to my original values. The development of these strong pedagogical relationships influence classroom management. They're not going to be as bold generally if they respect you, you are on their side if they see it that way. Good activities can motivate, but they need direction and purpose to be beneficial. So no point in having a game like the example I gave of hangman just for the sake of it. Students love to be challenged. Sometimes getting them out of their comfort zone really can help them. And finally, the value of collaboration. So being able to collaborate with others and collaboration between students, which I didn't really value till this year until I got to engage with them. Okay. Role of reflection allowed me to focus on my values, which aren't static, which I've already discussed as being kind of meandering over time. As a result of my SSAR, I've become a better teacher. This is what I believed, who is not afraid to reflect both critically and authentically on my own practice, as well as making me fully aware of the importance of lifelong learning, which will be a beneficial skill as I enter the teaching profession. And the hope for the future, as Maxine Green, who's already been quoted, I am not yet. I'm still an NQT, lots of development to do, and hopefully I'll have lots of development over the years. And so the quote there, just to conclude, a teacher a friend? This was a question I asked me at the end. An entertainer, a dictator, or a sage? None of these labels really none of these labels are truly accurate. However, at this stage I believe that this identity should be rooted in being professional, interested in students, and devoted, so that I, as a teacher, can truly cater for my students in the classroom in a student-centred manner. Therefore, I believe that my teaching philosophy is not something I merely believe or passively think, but something I live by and practice. Thank you.